Hi, everyone. This is Michelle Grimolia, the president and CEO here at Woodland Pond. I'm coming to you live via satellite, as they used to say. It's Tuesday afternoon, um, August 30th. I'm not looking at my calendar, but I believe today is the 30th. I've just gotten in from Albany, where I spent the morning and yesterday afternoon at a conference of professionals within the senior living industry, specifically the continuing care retirement industry, with a number of my colleagues. Actually, the bulk of my executive team joined me this year for the conference, and it was fantastic. I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes, but that is why I was not able to be here right at noontime, and you're just getting this on a recording today. So I have a few things I just wanted to mention and bring up. Very important. Tomorrow at 3 p.m., there is a resident association meeting. The resident association meeting is a meeting of all residents. All residents are invited. All residents are part of our resident association, regardless of where you reside. The more people that attend the meeting, the more representation that you get, the more ideas you get, and so forth. The meeting will be hosted by the Residents Council, and the topic for tomorrow's meeting, roughly translated, because I don't have it in front of me, is why volunteering your time at Woodland Pond can come back to you and bring you so many benefits emotionally, from a productivity perspective, from a community perspective. So it's going to be more of a conversation, from what I understand from Michelle Cacavano and the Residents Council, really talking about different opportunities for volunteering here at the community, primarily focused on committees, interest groups, the Residents Council, those kinds of things, and just with some of the members providing their experiences, reflecting on how the volunteering has been able to provide them really such an inroad into getting to know their neighbors. Again, feeling productive, such a huge thing. You know, we've talked about it so much, particularly during COVID, when everyone was in quarantine and isolated. And there's just sort of this underlying current of, what's my purpose today? What am I going to do to be able to be productive? There are lots of opportunities on campus. And I know for myself that, some days on a weekend, or, if I have an extended vacation, some days I just wake up and say, gosh, what am I going to do today? Am I going to do anything productive? And those days don't feel as great to me as the days where I feel like I'm actually being productive in some way. So lots of opportunities for volunteering. I'd highly recommend attending the meeting. There'll probably be some other resident council type announcements there, but that will be in the pack at 3 p.m. And I can't encourage you enough to attend that meeting. It'll be a great meeting. Let's see. The next thing is that currently Mary Jo did get called for jury duty today. So if you live in independent living, typically Monday through Friday, actually 7 days a week now, you typically would have Mary Jo to give a phone call to if you've got a bump or a bruise or a question about health. But she's on jury duty. So, just do what you would typically do on a weekend before Angel was here, or in the evening time. Contact concierge. They can provide you some recommendations in terms of, potentially going to first care, or if needed, they can put you in contact with the manager on duty. As I said, a number of my team members were up with us physically in Albany, but at this point, everybody's making their way back to either home or the community. We did have a couple of managers there still on campus. So it was probably a little bit more reminiscent of a weekend yesterday and today, but we are all always available to be contacted. That's never an issue. So not to worry about that. Now, just on that point, it has been raised to my attention by a couple of people in the past, several months, that, when we don't have Mary Jo on campus in independent living, or Angel Murphy, residents sort of become a little bit annoyed or aggravated. This is in independent living specifically, that we don't have medical personnel on site to attend to a new medical need or question. And I just want to gently remind everyone that this is independent living. At least this segment of the conversation relates to independent living, and primary care and emergent care is not provided here in independent living. We are not licensed to provide urgent care or emergency care anywhere on campus. So anyone having any kind of a medical emergency, regardless of where you live on campus, would have to be attended to by an EMS or transported to the emergency room. We're limited in terms of the medical care that we can provide, and certainly in independent living, it's not a medical environment. So you would need to do when you're not feeling well or you have a question. Mary Jo and Angel are not there around the clock. Uh, our original model and our contract actually, and our pricing even, only ever reflected one full-time wellness RN. I made the decision to invest in adding Angel as a second RN and did not make that a resident bill back item. It was never reflected in monthly service fees. And we don't bill for Angel's time, but we've doubled the amount of wellness RN time that we do have. And that was sort of something that I, agreed to do after a number of discussions with folks, sort of to make people feel, more comfortable. But there was never a contractual requirement to do that. And that's not typical within CCRCs. We are the only CCRC in the state that has a wellness RN on the weekends at all. So just doing what you would have typically done prior to coming to Woodland Pond. If you don't feel well, you call your primary care physician, or you, go to urgent care, whatever you feel comfortable with. And again, contact a concierge, or security if it's overnight. They will get in touch with one of us as the manager on duty if you need some guidance. But I did just want to mention that because there's been a couple of issues that have arisen, and I wanted to do it gently, but just a reminder that there are differences between what's offered in independent living and in other areas of the community. So tomorrow and Thursday, I would expect that you'd see, full staffing from a management perspective. We're going into a long weekend for Labor Day. You may see that there are some, dark offices. Rest assured, we're always available. Just about all of us are available 24/7. Not to worry. And staffing looks good going into the weekend for the health center, as we would expect because of our great staffing numbers. So not having too much else, housekeeping or agenda type items, I thought I'd just share a little bit about the conference that we attended today and yesterday, and some of the things that we learned and we'll be bringing back to the community. So the conference was hosted by an organization called Leading Age New York. And Leading Age New York is the premier advocacy organization for not-for-profit senior living providers across the country. So we are not-for-profit, so we check that box. We are a senior living provider, we check that box. And we need advocacy, we need outreach. So we check all the boxes. So in addition to having a national chapter of Leading Age New York, there's also a New York chapter. And I have been the president of the New York chapter of the CCRC cabinet within Leading Age New York for a number of years. My term ended in July, but I remain as an active member of that cabinet. And it's incredibly important. And I'm sure that if you spoke to Jason or Christy or Shannon or Bridget or Cameron, all of whom attended the conference, they would tell you that it was great to be in the room with our colleagues. They were from all over the state, and we're all dealing with the same issues. We're really not direct competition with any of the CCRCs in the state, the true CCRCs. So it really is just an information sharing. Leading Age New York brought in excellent speakers. There was plenty of Q&A, lots of time to spend time with your colleagues. So it was really fantastic. So some of the things that we focused on, and I need to really sit down with my team and the board to figure out how we can operationalize some of these things, but some of the focuses within the industry that you should be aware of that were discussed in depth at the conference were things like cybersecurity. So not just at the Woodland Pond level, because we focus a huge amount of time and resources on making sure that our information technology networks or our cybersecurity space are very secure. Because all of our work and all of our computing and all of our data all now is electronic. It's very important, especially with hackers and viruses and security risks online, that it's a high priority, of course, for Woodland Pond. But what the conference actually focused on was a bit more about how to be educating and working with resident population on their own security issues with their electronics. So we spent about an hour and a half in a session on that topic. So we're going to be working on some, additional educational campaigns. This goes beyond just the fraud risk that we talked about from time to time. This really is just overall security of your personal devices, your computers, personal medical devices we talked extensively about. So if you have For example, a monitor that monitors your type 1 diabetes data automatically. Let's say it works on Wi-Fi. There can actually be security risks there from an information technology perspective. And there are some best practices that should be put in place to ensure that your private health information that's being transmitted on those devices is not being compromised. So we spoke about that extensively, and it was something I hadn't really thought about much. And we're going to have to think about how it might impact our residents and what we can do to help protect from that the risks there. We spent an extensive amount of time, of course, talking about staffing challenges across the state. It was reported that in the last 3 years, 15% of direct care workforce in long-term care has left the field. So 15% have outmigrated from the field in in total. I knew the numbers were high, but to think about an entire sector, our sector, and knowing that statewide 15% of the professionals have left the field entirely, that's daunting. Um, that has quelled a little bit, but we talked extensively about that and workforce challenges, recruitment strategies, and different things like that. So that was another topic, of course, that we discussed extensively. For the bean counters out there and those that are interested in the market, we talked a lot about interest rates, inflation, the outlook of the economic markets. As all of you know, I think, continuing care retirement community models typically rely heavily on a strong economy and a strong housing market. So there's a lot of time focused at our industry conferences on these things. So some national representatives from financial institutions came and presented on that data, what we know to have happened during the last 2 years, what we expect to happen with the Fed and other things over the next several years, and a general inability to predict, although hope that we can figure out when inflation may continue to slow and we might see some relief here. But we talked extensively about that topic. Multiple different sessions on marketing. Shannon attended all of those, and focusing on digital marketing, identifying the new and incoming consumer for continuing care retirement communities. We also spent an entire session yesterday learning about how communities across the country have instituted what's called continuing care at home. So it's a care plan managing model that you would pay a subscription fee for and an entrance fee. But rather than actually moving into independent living, the community would actually manage your care for you in your home. So it's sort of akin to living in independent living and choosing to stay with aides rather than moving to the health center. But this is something that we would offer to folks in the community at large. This is not currently being done in New York State, although legislation was passed a couple of years ago to allow for it. But it's not something that Woodland Pond is actively looking into at this time, primarily because you would have to be able to staff such a thing. But it's a very interesting concept. And it was reiterated repeatedly at the conference that this is one of the things that the new consumer will be looking for. So the support and the idea and the case management and the concierge services and the transportation that you can access at a residential community, but to have it right there in your own home. So it was definitely thought provoking. We talked with a couple of providers about different emerging technology platforms, so primarily related to staffing and virus protection, meaning bacteria, virus, those kinds of things using ultraviolet light. So we saw a couple of in-depth presentations by some emerging technology providers, which were somewhat interesting. I don't know how applicable, but definitely interesting to know what's coming in the market. And then our closeout session today was almost 2 hours on something that they refer to as equity and inclusion, but related to diversity. So essentially talking about how to enhance and preserve equity among staff. And they really made the distinction between equality and equity. So for example, the gentleman said, if I gave everyone a size 10 men's shoe, there would be equality. But not everyone can use a size 10 men's shoe. So there's no equity. So you really got us thinking about, customizing what we're doing primarily focused on staff. We did speak about residents a bit, but coming to each staff member and looking and saying, not everyone needs a size 10 shoe. Yes, that would be equitable, but we need to move beyond equality. I'm sorry, that would provide equality. We need to move beyond equality and move into equity. And that's something we need to be thinking about a lot. It also, the conversation circled around inclusivity and diversity. And we talked a lot about how a lot of communities, of course, struggle with diversity when it comes to things like racial diversity and ethnic diversity, and maybe much more diverse in other areas. There was, 24 to 36 different aspects of diversity that are measured on a regular basis, but it really emphasized that oftentimes many of those get overlooked. Looking at the big ticket items, or the big ones: gender, age, race, and ethnicity. Those were kind of the big ones, but they kind of really focused on the fact that there's a lot of different ways that you can measure diversity. But they also really talked about how important it is for a community to establish what are your diversity goals. And I found it personally very interesting because, of course, in senior living and in CCRCs in general, you don't see a huge amount of diversity in the population of residents, despite whatever efforts you may undertake. And that's not specific to Woodland Pond. That's not specific to New York State. That is specific to the industry as a whole. And a lot of that is cultural. It's very common that, Western European or European cultures, or Anglo-Saxon generation, are more likely to not care for their seniors in their home, in a multi-generational home. Whereas you look at just about, every sort of other ethnicity across the world, folks are much more prone to say, my loved ones are staying right in this home. There are cultures that if you were to, put your loved one in a senior living facility, you would be frowned upon and potentially ostracized from your community. So there's a lot of ethnicity, historical ethnicity and cultural norms that can't easily penetrate the CCRC environment. So, there are challenges to be met, and by no means does anyone want to throw the towel in, but we have more opportunity on the staffing side, because you don't necessarily have those cultural barriers to working in the long-term care setting. So the question becomes, in both cases, both with the resident population and the staff population, has your organization set their goals, and do the goals make sense? And again, to the point, I found it extremely interesting that the PhD individual that had come to present on this, he came from the Midwest, really said, what you can do is, first of all, establish a baseline of diversity within your campus, whether it be with the staff or with the residents, and measure, the top of those 12 different or 24 different indicators. Get a baseline as to where you are across all of those different factors. And then say to yourself, a very good goal initially would be at least to have our community, from a staffing perspective and a resident perspective, if we can get there, is to at least mirror the actual geographic community from which, or in which we're located. And I thought it seems simple, but it seems like a great first step. So first, measure where you are, and then set a goal to say, we at least want this community to reflect, what's around us, right? So that our community looks like what the surrounding community looks like. So I was energized by that conversation. We talk about diversity and inclusion a lot. And sometimes it's a little bit difficult to figure out where you're going to start. So there was just a lot of creative thinking. I walked away with a lot of great things to be thinking about with the governance folks on our board, my management team, even with the Residents Council. So I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to have gone to the conference. And I look forward to sharing more with you as we come into the next following weeks and months and see what we can operationalize. But that's all I had for today. As I said, I'll be in the office certainly Wednesday and Thursday of this week. Not sure about Friday yet. And then it's a long weekend for Labor Day. And then basically summer's over. So you'll see a lot of us. Have a great day. Thank you.